Forget everything you've been told about morality and politics. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli blew up philosophy by creating a ruthless guide to conquering and holding on to power. His name became a curse word, but his lessons are used by everyone from presidents to corporate CEOs. How to manipulate public opinion. When is a lie more useful than the truth? Why can cruelty be a virtue? Before we begin this fascinating journey, be sure to subscribe to my channel. It really inspires me. Let's get started. Part 1. The Real Deal. So Machiavelli flipped the script big time when it came to political philosophy. Before him, thinkers were all about those ideal, pie-in-the-sky governments with flawless leaders acting on divine wisdom. Machiavelli wasn't down with that. He was interested in what he called the effectual truth, focusing on how power really works in the world, no matter if the reality was uncomfortable or challenged morals. This shift in thinking came from Machiavelli's days, working as a high-ranking official in the Florentine Republic. Between 1498 and 1512, he had the role of second chancellor and secretary to the Ten of War. This job had him zipping around on diplomatic missions, rubbing elbows with kings and generals, organising military stuff and dealing with all kinds of political messes back home. While philosophers were cooking up theories in libraries, Machiavelli was out on the field, getting hands-on experience with power. What he saw during those years blew apart all the comfy ideas about leadership that people had clung to since the days of Augustine and Aquinas. It turns out, the leaders who were big on mercy, forgiveness and trust often ended up losing, while those who played hardball brought peace and stability to their lands. The old idea that doing good automatically led to good governance wasn't just off base, it was downright dangerous. Nice guys sticking to what was seen as good often made lousy leaders. Take Piero Soderini, for example. He led the Florentine Republic for a big chunk of Machiavelli's career. Soderini ticked all the boxes for being a stand-up guy. Honest, merciful, trusting, and always sticking to the rules. He was fair to his political enemies, giving them shot after shot to prove themselves. But when trouble reared its ugly head, he chose to be patient and persuasive instead of acting fast. This niceness was his undoing. His foes took advantage of his virtues and eventually brought him and his republic crashing down. Soderini's goodness was his Achilles heel. His people suffered for his unwavering morality. This wasn't just a one-off thing. During Machiavelli's time, Italy was a mess, with foreign armies from France, Spain and Germany duking it out, while local rulers couldn't get their act together to resist effectively. The standard political theories back then were no help at all. Philosophers could talk till they were blue in the face about being just and merciful, but they had zilch to say about stopping foreign invasions or quelling uprisings. The divide between dreamy ideals and real-world needs had grown so wide that political theory was basically useless for anyone actually running a government. Machiavelli decided to bridge that gap by crafting a new way to look at politics. His effectual truth method meant watching successful leaders closely, not worrying about their morals. He looked at legendary figures like Moses and Theseus, as well as contemporary ones like Cesare Borgia and Ferdinand of Aragon. Instead of worrying if these guys were nice, he wanted to know if they got the job done. What did they do to gain, hold and expand power? How did they deal with enemies, foreign threats and sudden chaos? Which of their personal traits helped them thrive, where others flopped? These down-to-earth questions led to big discoveries that changed how people thought about politics and laid the groundwork for modern government. However, some of his conclusions made old-school moralists clutch their pearls, turning Machiavelli into a big bad wolf in the eyes of many. The shift from focusing on imagined truth to embracing real-world truth marked what many scholars believe was the birth of political science as its own field. Before Machiavelli came along, political theory was more or less part of moral philosophy or sometimes theology, all about teaching ethics and spiritual growth. But thanks to Machiavelli, studying politics meant really observing what's happening, testing ideas, and coming up with theories to predict and explain how politics actually works. This change laid the groundwork for everything from the theory of international relations we use today to how we study voting behaviour and the design of institutions. However, it also sparked an ongoing intellectual crisis. If being effective in politics means setting aside traditional moral values, what does that mean for how power relates to justice? Machiavelli posed this challenging question, but didn't settle it, leaving those who came after him to grapple with the tricky balance between being realistic in politics and holding on to moral ideals. Part 2. All of Machiavelli's political thought was based on deep observation of human psychology, which was significantly ahead of its time. What he saw about human behaviour wouldn't be matched in detail until experimental psychology came around nearly 400 years later. But his take on human nature wasn't just about being cynical or thinking poorly of people. He dove way deeper, looking at how our thinking biases, emotions and societal influences guide how we act in politics. This realistic view of psychology became the foundation for all future analyses using Machiavelli's ideas, so it's key to grasp what he figured out about how humans think and how that led to his political ideas. These days, fields like behavioral economics and political psychology have pretty much backed up Machiavelli's main ideas about how people make choices under stress. At the heart of his psychology is a theory we might call conditional loyalty. Humans aren't naturally evil or good, but they're self-centered and react to what's going on around them. People act nicely when it's to their benefit and badly when being bad seems to pay off. So if you get the incentives and psychological pressures people face, you can mostly predict what they'll do. And to encourage good behaviour, you've got to set up systems and policies that reward it rather than punish it. Just telling people to act morally won't work, because it means going against what they perceive as beneficial to themselves. Machiavelli pointed out some specific thinking biases that make humans not great fits for traditional moral politics. Firstly, people almost always go for quick wins rather than waiting for bigger rewards down the line, even if those long-term gains are better. This need-it-now mindset makes it super tough for leaders to get backing for policies needing short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits. Think about voters rejecting infrastructure projects that'll really help them in a couple of decades, simply because it means paying more taxes now, or backing military efforts that seem like a quick fix, but could have dire consequences later on. Politicians who don't account for this bias, focusing instead on long-term goals, are likely to lose out to those who promise quick results. Secondly, according to Machiavelli, there's what he called ingratitude, but today we know it as the idea that people quickly get used to better conditions and start to take them for granted. A leader who brings about peace and prosperity might find that folks soon forget the chaos of before and start nitpicking over tiny problems. Yet any small bump in the road will lead to the current leader being blamed entirely, no matter the broader causes. This creates a bias favouring leaders with flashy charm, promising big changes, over those steady but less thrilling leaders who quietly get things done. Thirdly, there's this big overconfidence bias in how people judge their own skills and decision-making abilities. Most folks think they're better than average drivers, lovers and judges of character. In politics, this means they often think they can easily spot honest versus dishonest politicians, good versus bad policies, and competent versus incompetent leaders. Such confidence makes the public ripe for manipulation by savvy speakers who know how to play on our cognitive faults. It also leads to public skepticism of expert advice, especially if it clashes with their gut feelings. Leaders who get this bias and tailor their messages to account for it will likely do better than those who expect people to engage in rational debate. Lastly, Machiavelli noted that humans are basically copycats who take cues from what's happening around them more than from abstract ideals. People often imitate others, picking up behaviours from their social setting rather than just following principles. People care more about fitting in with their group than staying true to their morals. This means our actions are heavily influenced by what our peers expect and the rules we see, rather than our personal principles. So if a political system becomes corrupt and that's considered normal, even honest folks might start doing shady things just to avoid feeling left out. On the flip side, when the culture of an organisation expects honesty and watches over those standards, people tend to act right, even if the temptation to cheat crosses their minds. This idea is at the heart of why Machiavelli believed that good government is more reliant on solid rules and institutions than on teaching morals. He also spotted something that today's psychology would label as a fundamental attribution error in politics. When bad luck hits individuals, they often blame the world around them. But when others face tough times, it's easy to chalk it up to their own shortcomings. This uneven way of thinking creates a big challenge for political leaders trying to keep their reputation intact during rough times. People tend to blame leadership for economic downturns, natural disasters, or global troubles, even if these problems are out of the government's hands. At the same time, they pat themselves on the back for their own gains, not realizing that good governance may have set the stage for their success. Knowing about this bias sheds light on why skilled leaders sometimes lose out during difficult times, while less capable ones might remain popular when things are going well, thanks to conditions they didn't create. It also highlights the need for political leaders to not only make sound policies, but also skillfully handle public perception and media narratives. Part 3. Virtue's New Face, the Bold Shift in Excellence. Out of all Machiavelli's ideas, none has sparked more debate than his bold twist on the concept of virtue. The Italian term he uses might sound like the virtue, we know, but it carries a fresh, much more intricate meaning. Traditionally, virtue was all about consistently doing good, no matter the outcome, as taught by Christian morality and old-school philosophy. But in Machiavelli's world, virtue means using whatever traits and tactics are needed to meet political goals, depending on the situation. This marks a big departure from classic Western political ideas, offering a fresh way to measure a leader's success that prioritizes getting results over sticking to moral codes. Old-school virtue focused on 4 key traits that applied everywhere, no matter the situation. Prudence was about making choices grounded in moral wisdom, with an eye on the long-term spiritual impact. Justice involved treating everyone based on set moral standards, putting ethical duty above political gain. Fortitude meant showing guts by staying committed to virtue, even at personal or political cost, and temperance was about keeping desires in check with reasoned moral guidance. These traits were thought to lead to consistent, admirable behaviour that others would want to emulate. The classic view was that righteousness would eventually pay off because the universe was believed to favour just actions. Good people were expected to thrive, while evildoers would meet their downfall, thanks to this cosmic sense of fairness. But Machiavelli throws these assumptions out the window. His take on virtue is all about adapting to circumstances rather than sticking to a fixed moral guideline. A leader with this kind of virtue knows when to be generous to further political aims, or ruthless when it's a must. They're truthful if honesty strengthens alliances, but they also know when a little deception can prevent bigger issues. They're able to be patient when it buys them an advantage and act swiftly when hesitation could spell disaster. This sort of adaptability calls for top-notch psychological savvy, constantly assessing shifting situations and plotting new strategies. The demands for this kind of virtue go way beyond bending morals or just being ethically flexible. First and foremost, leaders need what Machiavelli would describe as a clear-eyed view of human nature. This means understanding people for who they really are, not who we'd like them to be or who moral doctrines say they should be. Political missteps often happen when leaders impose their values on others, wrongly thinking everyone shares their aims and priorities. Savvy leaders know people are motivated differently and tailor their strategies to fit those unique motivations. This takes sharp emotional insight and the ability to set aside personal preferences for strategic thinking. On top of that, Machiavellian virtue involves a flexible grasp of morality over time. Traditional virtue clung to principles that stayed the same no matter the era or circumstance. In contrast, Machiavelli's virtue relies on reading the context and assessing what's needed at that moment. Sometimes the situation calls for quick, decisive moves that might mean bending the usual rules. Other times, patience and long-term strategy are needed, even when everyone's clamoring for swift action. While visible power plays might sometimes be necessary, quiet negotiations could be wiser at other moments. Leaders who've mastered this can tell what each situation demands, adapting their behaviour to seize chances that less adaptable folks might overlook, and dodging pitfalls that stumble more predictably, acting rivals. Alright, so virtue isn't just about following one moral code, it's about juggling different sets of morals depending on what you're doing. Let's say a leader acts one way with family and friends, sticking to something like Christian values, but then switches it up in the political arena. Now this isn't just being two-faced or morally wishy-washy. It's more about understanding that different roles demand different moral responses, and that sometimes these roles clash. What works with loved ones might not fly in international talks. The kind of trust and forgiveness that's good for friends could be downright risky when dealing with political rivals who might want to see your downfall. Virtuous leaders can handle these moral overlaps without freaking out or giving up on morals completely. They keep their ethical compass solid, while adjusting their moral game to match their role. Now, Machiavelli had this idea about the toughest part of virtue being tuned into the times. What's needed of leaders changes with history. Certain eras prize some traits while looking down on others. When things are calm and going well, leaders who push for agreement, respect the rules and make slow, steady changes come out on top. But in times of chaos and crisis, it's the ones who can make quick, brave moves, shake up the system, and set new rules that lead effectively. The catch is that a leader who's perfect for one time usually gets stuck when things shift. That's why the ones who shine in war often stumble during the peace that follows, and those who steer well in peace falter when everything hits the fan. Ultimate virtue would mean being able to change your whole style depending on what the world throws at you, all while staying true to yourself. Machiavelli thought this total flexibility was possible in theory, but incredibly rare, which is why being a political leader is so tough, and why we see really great leaders so seldom across history. In Part 4, which deals with fortune, unexpected events, and the boundaries of human control, Machiavelli dives into the randomness and unpredictability found in political life. His work is one of the earliest and most detailed explorations of uncertainty in politics. Today's ideas about decision-making, strategy, and risk all echo Machiavelli's thoughts on how to navigate uncertain situations effectively. The concepts he introduced about fortune have made their way into various areas, from military strategy to business tactics and personal growth. However, the deeper philosophical aspects of what Machiavelli wrote about fortune are still debated and not fully understood by scholars. Back in medieval times, fortune was often seen as either God's way of working through what seemed like random events, or as a moral test, where good people eventually received good fortune, and wrongdoers faced negative consequences. This belief made fortune seem predictable over time, even if when precisely these events would occur wasn't clear. It also imbued fortune with moral significance, suggesting that randomness reflected deeper spiritual truths beyond human understanding. Political leaders operating under this belief could think that their virtuous actions would eventually pay off, with temporary issues reflecting either divine testing or a need for greater moral growth. This offered a stable mindset for political actions, providing confidence that moral integrity would lead to success. Machiavelli, however, saw fortune differently. He relied on what he observed rather than religious beliefs. To him, fortune was truly random, powerful, and didn't care about human values. Good people might suffer while bad ones might thrive purely by chance. This wasn't a temporary misunderstanding of a hidden divine order, but a fundamental aspect of political reality. The universe doesn't adjust natural disasters or economic shifts to align with human morality. As a result, political leaders should devise strategies that can adapt to and even take advantage of random events, rather than assuming good deeds will ensure good outcomes. Machiavelli used a metaphor of a river to describe fortune's role in politics. He said fortune is like a wild river that floods unpredictably, destroying everything in its path. Yet during calm periods, wise individuals can build structures to control and make use of the river's power in the future. This metaphor illustrates several key points about human capability and environmental limitations. Preparation during peaceful times is crucial for surviving tough times. One cannot control fortune directly, but can shape its impact by planning ahead, and the same natural forces that can be disastrous for the unprepared can benefit those who know how to harness them. The way Machiavelli described fortune using gender reflects certain Renaissance beliefs about human nature and power, which can seem problematic today. He portrayed fortune as a woman who favours bold and even aggressive approaches from young men. While the gendered language might be outdated, the insight into how risk-taking and recognizing opportunities work remains relevant. Fortune tends to reward leaders who make decisive moves in uncertain situations, as opposed to those who wait endlessly for all information to become clear. It favours those willing to take calculated risks over individuals who play it safe above all else. The real winners out there are those who keep cool and adapt when everything's changing fast, rather than getting stuck in place, overwhelmed by complexity and uncertainty. Machiavelli's take on the ups and downs life throws at us isn't just philosophical babble. It actually spins out some real-world advice that holds up across various times and political situations. For starters, leaders shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket. They need to diversify where they get their power, legitimize it, and gather support so that one random event doesn't knock everything down in one go. Then there's the idea of stockpiling resources, energy and political pull. With these reserves in place, they can swiftly jump on unexpected chances or tackle crises head-on. It's smart to have backup plans ready for different future scenarios, not just banking on the present trend continuing as it is. And when things go awry, they shouldn't freeze up. Instead, they should be mentally agile and emotionally tough to roll with the punches and not yearn for the good old days. Plus, it pays to set up institutions that can carry on regardless of who's in charge or what the environment looks like, rather than relying solely on one's personal charm or way of doing things. Maybe the biggest takeaway from Machiavelli's fortune analysis is understanding how people can steer their destiny around life's limits without being either overly hopeful or completely despairing. Leaders can't control luck, but with preparation, quick thinking and planning, they can sway how luck affects them. This point provides room for leaders to act meaningfully, without expecting miracles from their leadership, explaining why triumph in leadership isn't just about personal traits or know-how. It's about how these traits interact with ever-shifting circumstances that no one can ever predict fully. Getting a handle on this interaction allows for a better assessment of political performance and makes laying out realistic aims for effective leadership possible. It's not just about having high hopes that good intentions alone will lead to success. Part 5. The Prince and the Discourses on Livy. These books give us an intricate view of how leadership, institutions and what people are capable of swing and sway depending on whether we're talking about a monarchy or a republic. Tons of folks have heard of The Prince and might think Machiavelli is all about autocracies, but when you really dig in, you see he's comparing monarchies and republics, pointing out each one's strengths and trips depending on the times and the vibe of society. This tug-of-war between the two books hits on big questions around human behaviour, how societies grow, and figuring out how personal greatness and the success of the group can coexist. Stuff that's still firing up political arguments today. The Prince zeroes in on rulers who have to whip chaos into order, keep a grip on power when everything's shaky, and push changes through with folks pushing back. In these situations, a leader's got to call the shots quickly, use authority wisely, and bring out the big guns when sweet talking doesn't cut it. Princes need to fine-tune their own grit and smarts to navigate tricky political waters and play mind games with the best of them. They can't count on institutions or laws, because those might be messed up or just not there. Instead, they got to craft new systems nearly by sheer will, keeping them ticking with a mix of fear, respect and perks for those who matter. This makes princely rule kind of a one-man show, leaning real hard on the leader's unique flair and skills, which don't just pass on to the next guy easily. In the discourses, Machiavelli flips the script to explore how republic governments can tap into everyone's brains, spread power around safely, and keep things lively politically over time. Good republics nail down routines that work no matter who's in charge, and they encourage citizens to pitch in for the greater good. They also put in place barriers to stop one person or group from hogging all the power and wrecking the joint. This kind of government can be more stable and tackle tough issues better than an autocracy. But it can also seize up in a crisis, get sleazy when things are good, and spiral into infighting when people don't agree. Republics thrive on enough public spirit among folks to support community-focused institutions and go along with group decisions, even when it's a tough pill to swallow. The crux of why princely and republican governance differ is how they handle what political geeks now call the principal-agent problem. How do you get leaders to chase public goals over personal ones when they've got the power to make things happen? Monarchies tackle this by tying a ruler's success to their subjects' welfare. Screw up the economy, start unneeded wars or let chaos reign, and a prince risks being ousted by someone more competent. This aligns the ruler's goals with the public's needs without demanding any saint-like motives, but it also puts a lot on the leader's mindset, offering no easy fixes for bad calls or bungling leaders. Republics, on the other hand, address this problem with a mix of competition and shared responsibility, with different officials checking on each other, and elections giving the public a chance to change the lineup without having to revolt. This setup minimizes the fallout from personal slip-ups or shady deals, and drives leaders to stay in tune with what people want. It's like this. Having a government that takes bold action is tough when special interests swoop in, thanks to their well-organized efforts and resources. For republican systems to click, you need citizens who are educated, financially secure, and actively involved in civic matters to keep a watchful eye on their leaders. But things start to unravel when inequalities get out of hand, outside forces demand quick action, or when internal squabbles make compromises a pipe dream. Machiavelli breaks it down for us, saying the decision between a princely or republican government should hinge on the here and now, not on some lofty ideals. New nations shaking off colonial chains, places picking up the pieces after civil wars, or those under existential threats, might need a strong leader to bring things back to basic stability and safety. On the flip side, societies that have found their groove with educated people, mixed economies and stable surroundings might fare better with republican setups that can handle tough issues and draw consensus. The sad part, successful rulers often don't want to shift to a republican style, even when it's the smart move as times change. At the same time, republics can drop the ball when it comes to strong leadership during real crises. So we get this back and forth dance where governments swing between autocratic and republican as outside pressures and internal growth dictate. There's this deep-rooted philosophical tug-of-war between the prince on one side and discourses on the other. The prince figures people will mostly stay self-centered and disengaged no matter the setup, meaning standout leaders are crucial for any big political wins. The discourse angle argues that the right systems can nurture civic duty and spread political involvement around. This opens the door for group wisdom and shared leadership when conditions are right. Today's democratic theories are still wrestling with this push and pull, balancing bigwig leadership and public involvement, efficiency with representation, know-how with accountability. Machiavelli offers a lens to think about these trade-offs, reminding us there's no one-size-fits-all. The aim isn't to stick with princely or republican methods forever, but to get a handle on when each is a good fit and how societies can switch gears as their situation evolves. Part 6. War as the ultimate political art. Machiavelli had a way of looking at war that wasn't just about battle strategies. He saw it as deeply tied to politics. He He reckoned that being skilled in war was the key political talent, because everything a government does depends on protecting its territory from threats inside and out. This idea opened up a deep dive into how military forces are organised, like citizen armies versus hiring outsiders, and how using force shapes and holds together political systems. Influences from his thoughts can be traced all the way from Napoleon to today's strategies for dealing with insurgencies. But perhaps his most significant insight was on how getting ready for the war affects a country's political culture and how different styles of organising military power lead to different kinds of governments. At the core of Machiavelli's thoughts on military matters is his view that states can't make it without strong armed forces, but those very forces can threaten the government's stability and civilian control. This gives rise to what you might call the military problem of political order. If a country's military is weak, it risks being overrun by outside invaders or facing a revolution from within. On the flip side, if the military is too strong, it could stage a coup or push its own agenda on the civilian government. The way a nation handles this balance creates different political systems, each with its own pros and cons. That's why figuring out these trade-offs is crucial for setting up political systems that last, as well as for judging how current governments are doing. Machiavelli laid out 3 main ways to put together military forces, each carrying its own political effects and practical results. First up, you've got mercenaries, soldiers for hire who fight not out of allegiance, but because they are getting paid. This reduces the chance of a takeover, since mercenaries don't care about the politics of the land they're fighting for and can be shown the door once their job is done. However, hiring mercenaries is costly and risky in other ways. Their loyalty can falter, especially if a better paying offer comes along from the enemy, and they can drag out wars just to make more money. In the worst scenes, they might even flip sides if things seem dire. The second option is using auxiliary forces, which come from friendly states or influential local groups. This can be cheaper and might bring special military skills not easily developed on one's own, but it creates a reliance on other powers that might ditch the efforts at critical moments or sway decisions at home. These forces ultimately follow their own agendas, rather than those of the country they temporarily fight for. Local factions aligned to powerful elites present similar issues. Their loyalty sticks with their own people, rather than the central authority. Both of these auxiliary setups risk compromising the country's political freedom, a weakness savvy foes can exploit. Lastly, rulers can form their own armies with citizen soldiers, those who fight to safeguard their own lives and communities. This type packs a punch when it comes to motivation, since they're protecting what's theirs. Citizen armies come cheaper than mercenary squads and are harder to buy off. But there's a downside. Citizen soldiers might become threats to internal stability, having both military know-how and vested interests in how the politics play out. They might wield their military prowess to push back against unpopular laws, back political rivals, or call for more say in government decisions. Handling citizen armies demands a different set of political skills than dealing with mercenaries or hired fighters, leading to ongoing clashes between military efficiency and civilian oversight. The link between military setup and the political culture it fosters is likely the key piece of Machiavelli's military thinking. Societies leaning heavily on hired soldiers often develop passive, business-focused political environments where citizens concentrate on their own economic interests, leaving political choices to the pros. While this can bring about prosperity and calm in peaceful times, it leaves them vulnerable when military conflicts arise and quick action is needed. In contrast, societies with citizen armies often nurture active and engaged political cultures, with folks expecting a say in big policy matters and shouldering personal stakes in collective defence. This builds resilience in military emergencies but stirs up more internal political strife, making swift decision-making harder to achieve. The decision between these paths touches on deeper issues of balancing personal freedom with collective safety, a debate still influencing today's military strategies and civic duties. Machiavelli's thoughts on fortifications, siege tactics and defence strategies showcase how technological shifts interplay with political frameworks, creating fresh strategic avenues and risks. The rise of gunpowder artillery in the late 1400s changed the game, tipping the scales between offence and defence. Once formidable, high walls and sturdy castles became liabilities as cannons could easily reduce them to rubble. This tech leap demanded reimagined fortress designs, fresh siege strategies and defence approaches, prioritising mobile forces over static defences. But there was more at stake than just military implications. Societies that swiftly embraced new military technologies often outpaced their more traditional rivals. Leaders savvy about the impact of tech changes on military effectiveness could seize temporary edges to grow their power. Conversely, political systems clinging to outdated military methods often fell to more nimble foes, despite their other strengths. This creates a constant need for political systems to keep an eye on military advances and be ready to tweak existing setups as technology and strategies evolve. Modern-day examples include how nuclear weapons shape global diplomacy, the influence of cyber warfare in today's conflicts, and what artificial intelligence might mean for future military showdowns. Part 7. Religion as a tool in politics. The power of the sacred in state governance. Machiavelli had quite the controversial take on religion, one of the most intriguing parts of his political thinking. He really explored how spiritual beliefs connect with the political world, foreshadowing today's ideas about civil religion, power of ideology, and cultural legitimacy. Unlike the medieval thinkers who saw religion as a bedrock of eternal moral truths to guide political moves, Machiavelli viewed it more as a tool, something political leaders could wield skillfully or clumsily, depending on the situation. This perspective shocked religious figures of the time and still sparks debates today about whether Machiavelli was quietly skeptical of religion, a typical believer, or something else entirely. Despite the controversy, his thoughts on how religious bodies and political power play off each other are surprisingly forward-thinking and continue to shape modern discussions about political legitimacy and social unity. Machiavelli's ideas here are built on the notion that any thriving political system needs a common belief system, something that inspires people to put community needs over their own. Pure logic in political decisions doesn't stir up enough dedication for the sacrifices needed for strong governance. People need to feel like their political community is working for something greater than just personal gain if they're going to back tough policies, pay higher taxes, or risk their lives in wars. Religion taps into this deeper sense of purpose because it ties political duties to higher spiritual meanings, something mere reasoning can't achieve. This gives religious institutions substantial political value, but also makes them potentially threatening competitors, depending on how they and political leaders manage their relationship. The real challenge is how to leverage the motivational power of religion for political goals without letting religious forces overshadow government control. Machiavelli looked at ancient Rome to show how advanced political systems could blend spiritual and secular powers to enhance legitimacy and maintain social order. Roman religious practices weren't about saving souls or teaching personal morals. They were about serving civic purposes. Ceremonies celebrated societal achievements, reinforced social structures, and fostered a sense of unity. Religion helped bolster authority by suggesting that political duties were divinely sanctioned and superior because of divine approval. But Roman religion also offered a means for political critique and reform when systems became corrupt or needed change. It created a balance where religion bolstered political stability, yet allowed for change and growth. Looking at ancient Roman religion versus modern Christianity shows how different religions offer different political possibilities and limitations. Christianity centers on personal salvation, all-encompassing morality, and values that sometimes clash with the real-world demands of politics. Its teachings of forgiveness, humility, and spiritual focus might clash with the characteristics needed for strong political leadership and effective military engagement. Religious institutions often assert their own authority to judge political decisions based on their beliefs, which can lead to conflicts with political leaders. When these tensions escalate, they might stall government actions or even lead to civil wars, as there's a clash over who holds the real power. However, when religious and political leaders work well together, Christianity can serve as a strong pillar for political legitimacy and unite people across different social divides. The teachings of Christianity can inspire individuals to make personal sacrifices for the greater good, fostering unity beyond just economic and ethnic lines. Machiavelli offered some practical advice on handling religious bodies. Focus on the positives they bring while keeping any conflicts in check. Political figures should show respect for religious customs and take part in religious ceremonies to display their respect for higher values and shared cultural norms. This approach can build trust with religious communities and tap into the motivational and legitimizing power of faith. However, it's crucial for leaders to maintain a degree of independence, ensuring that political decisions are guided by necessity rather than purely religious principles when the two are at odds. This balance requires diplomatic finesse and sensitivity to religious feelings, since open rifts can harm both religion and politics. The aim is to foster cooperative ties where both religious and political bodies can fulfill their roles without stepping on each other's toes. Machiavelli's deeper thinking goes beyond just strategy, posing important questions about how truth and practicality interact in politics. If religions mainly serve political ends, what does that mean for their claims about truth and moral fairness? If political leaders use religious symbols strategically, can these symbols still inspire true devotion and ethical behavior? And if people realize their faith is being used politically, will it still fuel effective collective action? These musings prefigure modern arguments about ideology, propaganda, and how shared stories help keep societies together. They're also relevant to today's discussions around civil religion and political rituals, exploring how secular societies try to evoke a sense of motivation that religions have traditionally provided. Machiavelli's insights hint that a shared belief system is crucial for a well-ordered society, but also highlight the inherent conflict between treating sacred ideas as tools or valuing them for their own sake, posing ongoing challenges for leaders. Navigating between cold manipulation and idealistic naivety in dealing with religious entities and beliefs. Part 8. So let's dive into Machiavelli's take on how governments change over time. He developed this brilliant concept about political cycles, showing how systems evolve, get messed up, and eventually morph into something else. This isn't just some dusty theory. It draws inspiration from ancient thinkers like Polybius, but Machiavelli spices it up with real-life observations and a keen understanding of human psychology. According to Machiavelli, no government can stay the same forever. They undergo changes due to internal conflicts that arise over time. Each type of government creates certain incentives and limitations, which influence how people behave. Over time, these behaviors start transforming the very conditions that made the government work well in the first place. Eventually, the difference between what the government demands and how people actually behave becomes too wide. At this point, the system either needs to adapt and reform or get replaced entirely. This whole cycle is somewhat predictable if you know what you're looking for, which means you could potentially foresee political shifts and design systems better equipped to handle these changes. Despite this, the same social and psychological forces that push for change make it hard for those in power to notice these shifts and do something about them before it's too late. Machiavelli laid out this classic cycle, starting with a monarchy. You get a strong leader who brings order out of chaos. Over time, as things stabilize, there's less need for such exceptional leadership. New leaders, who inherit rather than earn power, often lack the virtues of their predecessors. As society prospers, people become less tolerant of unchecked authority and more eager to have a say in their government. This shift gradually turns a well-functioning monarchy into a tyranny, leading to dissatisfaction and the potential for revolution. When the tyranny gets toppled, it often gets replaced with an aristocracy. Here, a select few, with wealth or superior knowledge, take charge. This can work well if these elites use their advantages for the greater good. They have education, far-reaching visions, and the ability to make decisions that require technical know-how without falling prey to short-sighted popular demands. However, successes here breed their own problems. Over time, the ruling elites might get complacent and look out for themselves rather than lead effectively. New wealth and talent start to emerge, challenging the old guard's hold on power. When groups feel left out, they start to build up resentment against the privileges enjoyed by the aristocracy and push for a more inclusive political system. As the once noble aristocracy turns into a corrupt group, this sets the stage for a democratic revolution, usually spearheaded by popular leaders promising to give power back to the people. For a democracy to be effective, citizens need to be educated, economically secure, and possess a sense of civic duty to take part in political life meaningfully. Democracy taps into the collective wisdom of the people better than any other system, motivating leaders to be responsive to their needs. It also establishes peaceful methods to settle disputes and adapt to changes without resorting to violence. However, as democracies become successful, they start to erode the very social conditions that make them work well. Wealth leading to prosperity shifts people's attention to personal matters, making them less inclined to participate in civic activities. Political success also attracts opportunists who misuse democratic systems to gain power without a true commitment to democratic ideals. Moreover, economic disparity leads to conflicts among different factions that democracy struggles to resolve peacefully. When democracy slips into chaos or mob rule, people might become open to accepting authoritarianism again, valuing stability and security. This completes a cycle and brings society back to where it started, though usually at a different stage of development with unique features. External factors like conquest or natural disasters can disrupt this cycle, as can innovative institutions that address certain weaknesses of existing systems. Still, the underlying social and psychological forces that drive these cycles can't be removed by institutional design alone. Therefore, political systems need constant evolution and reform to stay effective. Even the best systems will eventually face challenges that demand substantial changes. Learning about these cycles offers practical insights, not just historical speculation, that can guide modern constitutional design and political reform. By understanding these cycles, leaders can foresee potential issues and adapt institutions before problems become critical. It also helps citizens to have realistic expectations about their political systems, avoiding both overly optimistic and pessimistic views about progress and decline. Especially today, democratic societies deal with similar cyclical pressures, such as decreasing civic engagement, increasing inequality, and the rise of charismatic leaders. Machiavelli's insights offer a way to understand these issues and craft solutions that tackle the root causes rather than just the symptoms. Part 9. Machiavelli had this really interesting idea that's quite the opposite of what you might expect when it comes to political squabbling. Instead of seeing internal conflicts as a sign that the system's broken, he looked at them as a way for governments to get stronger. Back in the day, folks thought that if everyone was fighting, it meant things were falling apart, so they tried cooking up systems where everyone got along. But Machiavelli saw things differently. He thought that certain conflicts actually kept things running smoothly. They stopped power from piling up in one spot, pushed for creative new policies, and kept people involved across different social groups. In a way, Machiavelli was ahead of his time, pointing to ideas that are now core to how democracies work. Ideas like keeping government power checked, having different voices and interests represented, and healthy competition in politics. He wasn't just talking about how the system's set up, though. He dug deep into how these conflicts worked on a psychological and social level. He even figured out when they were more of a problem than a solution. It's crucial to understand this today if we want to keep democracies healthy and handle the usual friction that comes with complicated political landscapes. Machiavelli noticed that societies naturally split into groups with different goals, beliefs and ways of life. These aren't things you can just design away or teach out of people because they come from real-world differences, like social standings, money situations and cultural roots. If you try to erase or ignore these differences, It usually leads to one group taking over instead of everyone getting along. The folks left on the sidelines aren't going to be happy about it, which means you're looking at potential uprisings or rebellion. So to handle this, you need political systems that recognize these divisions and let groups pursue their interests without resorting to violence. You want smartly set up governments that protect the rights of the minority without stopping the majority from making decisions, that offer various ways for people to have a say in politics, all while keeping things running smoothly. To get a clearer picture, take Machiavelli's example of the patricians and plebeians in the Roman Republic. Most history books said these groups clashing was bad news for Rome, even leading to the downfall of their government. But Machiavelli believed these clashes actually kept Roman systems strong. If the patricians tried to hog all the power, the plebeians kept them in check, forcing them to cater to a wider audience. On the flip side, if the plebeians pushed too hard, the patricians would help them realize that changes need to be planned, not rushed. This back and forth made sure neither side got too strong, and helped Rome evolve and adjust its institutions over time. For conflict to be constructive and not just a messy fight, certain things need to be in place. First off, both sides should have enough shared values and interests so that, no matter how heated things get, they still feel part of the same team. If groups view their rivals as threats, or see them as having no right to be part of the political game, it stops being about competition and turns into a battle to the bitter end. Secondly, the system needs to give every significant group a real chance to shape political outcomes without needing to break the rules to do so. If people feel left out for good, they're going to look for other, possibly not so legal ways to make themselves heard. Alright, so here's the deal. Politics have got to stay in a zone where losing an election or a policy vote doesn't put a group's very existence or identity at risk. If political outcomes start determining whether a particular group can even survive, then it all becomes a zero-sum game where no one wants to cooperate anymore. To keep things productive, the systems that manage conflicts need to be well thought out, balancing the need for representation, getting things done and keeping everything stable. Different political channels should exist so groups can still push for their interests in ways other than just the usual elections. Think independent courts, a system that divides power like federalism, certain government agencies, or even direct democracy approaches. These options give minority voices a say, without relying entirely on majority rule. But it's crucial these avenues work smoothly together. Otherwise, things could grind to a halt, and necessary changes could get stuck. Balancing the protection of minority rights with the ability to act decisively, especially in an emergency or when there's broad agreement on a policy, is essential. This balancing act requires constant tweaking of the constitution as society and group dynamics evolve. If the conflict turns ugly and factions form, the risk to democratic institutions becomes huge. Demanding leaders and citizens stay alert. Machiavelli pinpointed several signs that politics might be going off the rails into factional chaos. It starts when groups see their political opponents not just as rivals, but as enemies. The talk moves from debating policies to attacking personal character. Institutions get used as tools for gaining an edge, rather than serving as fair platforms for resolving issues. If violence or its threats start sneaking into the political process, or if groups try to twist constitutional rules to secure unending power, watch out. On a global scale today, Machiavelli's insights ring true. Things like rising political divides, decreasing trust in institutions, and more people turning to methods beyond the Constitution in politics show the very kind of factional threats he warned about. Solving these issues demands more than just calls for politeness or trying to bridge party lines. It needs deep focus on the social and economic factors that make productive conflict possible, like fair economics, shared education, and systems that genuinely allow all important groups to sway political results. Moreover, it calls for leaders who can manage differences in a way that builds up rather than breaks down the system. The aim isn't to wipe out conflict, it's part and parcel of democracy, but to fix the environment so that it helps strengthen, not tear apart, democratic institutions. Part 10. The paradox of innovation and the problem of founding, Machiavelli dives into one of the trickiest puzzles in the world of politics. How do you set up new systems, or overhaul existing ones when those very changes could upset the apple cart? His take is that even worthwhile political shake-ups face pushback because change itself makes folks uneasy, no matter how good those changes might turn out to be. So there's this weird loop where the places that most need a revamp are often the least able to get it done, while the ones that are running smoothly might just sit back and do nothing, even when tweaks are needed. Making sense of this loop is key for anyone trying to stir up political change, whether that's in government, big business, or social movements. Machiavelli's psychological and strategic smarts keep cropping up in conversations about how to shake things up in organizations, start revolutions, or build institutions from scratch. Still, his insights also lay bare the built-in drawbacks and heavy costs that come with serious political change, no matter how worthy the cause. At the heart of this whole innovation paradox is Machiavelli's point that people are naturally wired to stick to what they know. Even when things are far from perfect, they prefer what's familiar over diving into the unknown. This tendency shows up in how people think and act, making change a tough nut to crack. In terms of mindset, folks often get emotionally attached to the systems they're used to. These systems might give them a sense of stability and identity, even if they don't work well. Any change risks rocking that boat, stirring up anxiety of losing status or security, and overshadowing potential upsides. On the practical side, current institutions often mean some people have a lot invested in keeping things the way they are because they really benefit from it. They'll push back on any change that might take away what they've got going. So you've got this mix of emotional and practical resistance, forming strong barriers against change, even when change seems like a no-brainer from the outside looking in. Meanwhile, folks who might gain from new changes often aren't that fired up about it. They're unsure if things will actually pan out, and don't really jump on board full steam ahead. The thing is, it's way easier for people to see what's wrong with what they have, since they're living it every day, than to imagine how things could be better with new changes. Imagination just doesn't pack the same punch as real-life experience. This gap between hard opposition and flimsy support piles up a mountain of challenges for those looking to make changes. They've got to battle unwavering opposition with the shaky backing. It just gets harder when changes take a long time to roll out. Costs pop up immediately, while benefits are off in the distance and kind of hazy. The groups pushing for change might fall apart during this time because supporters gradually lose steam, while opponents keep their fight very much alive. To tackle this resistance to change, changemakers need to smartly tackle both the mental and practical pushbacks they face. Successful movers and shakers either push through opposition head-on, or try to present changes in a way that seems less scary and more advantageous to important groups. Going the first route means packing enough punch to push changes through, but that might tempt those in power to slip into tyranny or misuse their power, which could mess up what they set out to do. The second route means piecing together coalitions and keeping the message in check so that opponents chill out and forward momentum builds. This often requires compromises, though, which can water down what those changes might have achieved. Both strategies need some top-notch leadership chops and a dash of good luck, often at times when it's hardest to come by. This sheds light on why major political transformations are pretty rare, and why attempts at reform often flop or result in unexpected issues while failing to tackle the original problems. According to Machiavelli, when you look at political founders who succeeded, there are certain patterns that can offer clues for today's reform efforts, though they also highlight the tough and sometimes morally grey areas tied to major changes. Firstly, these successful founders generally rise up during times of crisis when current systems are obviously not working, prompting people to be more open to change and the risks that come with it. Such times open the door for reform since resistance tends to weaken and people are more willing to try new things, though this also causes a rush that can leave little room for thorough planning and discussion. Secondly, those who successfully found new systems usually have standout personal traits that help them stay on course and keep pushing through huge hurdles. However, these traits can often include a sort of relentless ambition that might not sit well in a democracy once new systems are up and running. Thirdly, getting a successful new system off the ground often means using a mix of persuasion and force, but the way these are balanced makes a big difference in whether the institutions will be seen as legitimate and last over time. When it comes to political innovation, there are moral contradictions that create constant challenges for anyone wanting both effective reform and to keep their ethics intact. Big changes might require breaking the rules and procedures that have become stumbling blocks to improvement. However, consistently ignoring legal limits weakens the rule of law and might set examples that future opportunists exploit. Likewise, effective reform might need power to be concentrated in a way that sidesteps usual democratic processes and checks, but this concentration can lead to misuse and could set up authoritarian habits that hang around long past the intended reforms. These tricky questions can't be settled with just theoretical moral philosophy, because they involve real clashes between crucial values that don't always fit together neatly. Machiavelli's thoughts suggest that reformers need to face these moral costs head-on, managing them responsibly instead of pretending transformative change is possible without any downsides. This doesn't call for moral purity or a strict ideology, but rather a serious moral approach and practical wisdom, difficult qualities to keep when dealing with the pressures of big political changes. Considering Machiavelli's insights is very relevant today when looking at the issues confronting democratic systems, global groups and various social movements worldwide. Issues like climate change, fast-paced technological changes, and global economic shifts need new institutional thinking that challenges current norms and habits. Grasping how resistance works and what's needed for change can help today's reformers come up with more grounded strategies and stay clear of past errors. But Machiavelli also points out that some issues might be too massive or complicated for existing political systems to handle, which means facing the necessity for deeper changes that current democratic setups can't handle. This keeps a tension going between democratic values and actual effectiveness, requiring ongoing focus and innovative solutions in our institutions. The aim isn't to ditch democratic ideals, it's about finding ways to grow them and deal with issues their creators couldn't foresee. Part 11. Machiavelli figured out a long time ago that having political clout boils down to having dough, but he didn't stop at just saying money talks. He explored how different ways of taxing, spending, and spreading wealth mold political systems, each with its strengths and weaknesses. This kind of thinking gave a sneak peek into what now is known as political economy and public funds management. However, his take is unique because instead of daydreaming about what's fair or efficient, he was all about what actually keeps power intact. Getting a grip on these money matters is key for anyone trying to run a solid government, whether we're talking ancient times or today. Democracies everywhere still wrestle with issues Machiavelli pointed out, balancing what people want the government to do and the tax backlash, figuring out how private wealth stacks up against political power, and making sure there's enough cash for defense and to keep the show running. Machiavelli's thinking started with the simple truth that governments need steady cash flows to run smoothly. The catch? Every way of filling the treasury comes with strings attached, potentially putting the government's credibility and steadiness at risk. Taxes move money from pockets to public coffers but tick off taxpayers and can dampen people's drive to make more money. Borrowing works for now but can drag governments down with conditions set by lenders. Seizing assets brings in instant cash but kills trust and drives money out of the country, which hurts the economy in the long run. Even going on conquest can fill the treasury, but is costly in terms of building and maintaining an army. Each of these methods for keeping the government running involves giving up something now or later. That's why it needs smart thinking and planning. Machiavelli's understanding of how taxes relate to keeping political legitimacy shows some of the sharpest insights he ever had. Governments that mainly tax their people have to work hard to keep folks on their side, because if the populace doesn't like a plan, they'll push back. This encourages leaders to listen to the people but can make it tough to get things done quickly in a bind when money needs to flow to keep the nation safe. Governments with money coming from outside, like tribute or loans, don't have to worry as much about what the folks at home think, but they have to keep an eye on those foreign money pipes to avoid being backed into a corner and losing touch with. Home ground issues. Striking the right mix between cash from home and from abroad depends on each case. Knowing these trade-offs sheds light on why different types of governments stick to different financial rules and why those rules have predictable effects. Nowadays, you can see it in how oil-rich nations tend toward authoritarian rule, or how foreign aid influences democracy, as well as how world financial markets can tweak domestic policies. Machiavelli's thoughts about who has what and how much show through in today's arguments over economic plans and political durability. When the gap between the rich and the poor gets too wide, it shakes things up politically, because the needy get riled up and the wealthy get jittery, setting the stage for confrontation. Trying to spread out wealth through government actions brings its own set of political headaches. These efforts demand a strong government presence and might dampen the motivation for people to work hard and be productive. The main takeaway here is that for a political system to stick around for the long haul, it needs a way to keep inequality from getting so out of control that it tears at the fabric of society and damages the trust in governance. Back in the days of aristocracies, they handled this by pushing the rich folks to look out for those below them on the social ladder, offering protection and aid. Nowadays, democracies tackle this issue with things like progressive taxes and welfare systems that dole out resources through government channels. But both of these systems hit snags, thanks to economic shifts that stir up new inequalities and split societies in different ways. According to Machiavelli, there's no magic bullet to forever solve the tension between economic efficiency and political stability. Successful societies have to keep evolving their economic systems to tackle new problems. One of the longest-standing issues in democracies is how private wealth and political power are connected, a challenge Machiavelli pointed out long before capitalism became a thing. Wealthy individuals and groups can sway political outcomes by throwing money into campaigns, lobbying, and other financial pressures. This can give rich folks an edge, making it hard for democracy to be fair and answer to the needs of everyone. But trying to curb big money in the politics often falls flat, because money can flow through lots of different paths, dodging regulations. Plus, the skills that make someone a top-notch business person also often make them good at leading, so kicking the rich out of the political arena might mean losing out on some talented leaders. Machiavelli's take is that the aim shouldn't be to completely stamp out the political clout of wealth, probably an unrealistic goal, but to guide it so that it benefits the public, rather than just boosting private interests. This means setting up systems where private goals line up with public benefits and giving non-wealthy groups a fair shot to rally politically when needed. Modern tactics here include rules about campaign spending, insisting lobbyists be transparent, and providing public funds that help even out the political playing field. Take national defense, for example. When a country feels external threats looming, it shapes how they manage money and resources. Keeping a strong defense means pouring big bucks into people, equipment and infrastructure, which can clash with other government priorities and personal spending. Countries on the edge must figure out how to shift funds quickly if danger strikes, yet keeping these systems ready during peace times can stir up political friction. People naturally lean towards spending on immediate needs rather than gearing up for potential wars. But not being ready militarily can lead to being taken over, wiping out all other achievements a country has made. This sets up a tough balancing act in political economy, because laying out money for military readiness is an immediate burden, while seeing the payoff only becomes clear when conflicts arise. Machiavelli suggests that successful nations need to keep their military capabilities sharp without letting defense costs cripple their economic growth and social programs. This calls for smart planning and educating the public to grasp how securing the nation ties into their prosperity in the long run. You've got to have military organizations that play by the rules set by civilian leadership and don't gobble up more resources than what's needed for genuine safety concerns. Section 12. Diplomacy and International Relations Mastery. Machiavelli's take on international relations marks the dawn of what we now understand as modern diplomatic practice and strategy. His insights, even after 500 years, continue to shape foreign policy, international law, and military tactics. Much like his approach to domestic politics, Machiavelli focused on what works in the real world, using keen observation and practicality. When dealing with international matters, though, things get trickier as nations interact with each other. Unlike domestic politics, where rules and laws guide behaviour, the international arena is more like a free-for-all. No single authority exists to enforce agreements or stop conflicts among independent nations. This absence of control creates what we now call an anarchic system. Here, every country must fend for itself to survive and do well. Succeeding in this chaotic environment demands a different skill set than ruling within a country, although understanding human nature and power still play a crucial role. Machiavelli's ideas on diplomacy offer a playbook that's surprisingly useful for today's global relations landscape. At the heart of that playbook is Machiavelli's observation. International dealings are driven more by power and interests than by ethics or legal promises. Countries might shake hands over treaties and proclaim their commitment to international standards, but they'll break those promises if it keeps them strong and they think they can get away with it. This doesn't mean treaties are worthless or that morals don't factor into decisions. It means diplomacy should be rooted in clear-eyed assessments of what countries are likely to do, not what they ought to do in an ideal world. Smart diplomats recognize that nations act in their own interests and plan their moves based on that reality, instead of assuming countries will sacrifice their benefits for global peace or fairness. This hard-nosed look at global politics leads to better guesses about what countries will do and smarter ways to achieve international goals. Alliances are a case in point in the complex web of global politics. These partnerships can bolster a country's safety by pooling resources and putting up a united front. But they can also tie a country down, dragging it into unwanted conflicts or creating false senses of security if allies aren't reliable. Machiavelli suggests that forming alliances should boil down to a clear-eyed analysis of the pros and cons of each partnership, rather than just going along with the idea that international teamwork is always a good thing. Countries need to weigh the security and flexibility that alliances provide against the potential downsides of being beholden to others. They should aim for flexibility to react to new challenges as power dynamics and threats shift over time. We see these dynamics play out in today's world with NATO's evolving focus, changing alliances across the Middle East, and the changing partnerships in Asia-Pacific. Understanding the tie between military power and diplomatic success is one of Machiavelli's key contributions to international relations thinking. Alright, picture this. When countries are having those tough talks, the real power each one holds influences how things go. If a country's military is weak, it doesn't matter how good their diplomats are or how fair their demands seem. They'll find their choices limited. They'll keep running into situations where other countries just brush off what they say and go ahead with what they want. On the flip side, countries packing some serious military clout often get what they want just by hinting at using their force. No need to actually swing the sword. This is what's called the diplomatic utility of military power, where just the threat of using force can help settle things without a fight. But it's not as simple as it sounds. It's not just about having the weapons. It's about showing you're ready to use them if needed. A country that's all talk might find its influence doesn't match its armory. Meanwhile, a nation showing it will use its strength wisely can snag diplomatic wins that seem out of reach. Now, here's another twist in the tale. In the world of international relations, getting everyone to commit and work together isn't easy like it might be within a single country, where laws can force agreements to stick. Instead, countries decide to stick to deals based on whether they feel like it. This causes everyone to be wary of agreements because there's always a risk someone will pull out if it benefits them more. Game theorists call this a cooperation problem. Everyone stands to gain from teamwork, but trust issues get in the way. Our old pal Machiavelli had some insights on fixing these trust issues. He suggested creating deals where everyone wins by sticking to them over time, rather than trading short-term pain for possible future gain. Plus, it helps to have ways to keep an eye on everyone and make breaking deals costly. Tying these agreements to bigger, ongoing relationships means breaking one agreement could have bigger consequences down the line. Then there's the whole matter of reputation and trust in international dealings. Countries known for keeping their word have an easier time striking good deals since others believe they'll follow through. If you get a name for breaking promises, others will either demand upfront guarantees or avoid dealing with you altogether. Countries have to weigh the short-term temptation to break deals against long-term reputation damage, and that not only affects one-on-one relationships, but also how the world views them overall. Take today's world, for instance. Breaches in trade pacts can hurt future deals. Human rights records can affect how a country is viewed globally, and even decisions about nuclear weapons can shape security ties. Keeping an eye on these reputation effects can explain why some countries stick to their commitments, even when it might seem smarter not to in the short run, and why their diplomacy often extends beyond the original issues. Part 13. One of the toughest hurdles for any political system is making sure power shifts smoothly when leaders pass away, retire, or are pushed out. Machiavelli understood that these times can make institutions crumble, invite foreign threats, and spur internal factions to grab power. His deep dive into succession isn't just about picking the next leader. It's about how certain systems either help or hinder a peaceful handover of power. This has big implications for understanding modern challenges around democratic transitions, authoritarian handovers, and tweaks to institutions in developing nations. Machiavelli's thoughts on planning for succession, crafting institutional frameworks, and balancing personal authority with systemic stability still shape academic research and real-world policy in areas from corporate leadership to global development support. Yet he also pointed out how even the best-laid plans have their flaws, as they can't fully erase the risks of a major leadership shake-up. The crux of succession issues lies in Machiavelli's differentiation between authority tied to the personal traits of individual leaders and authority based on impersonal rules and structures. Political setups leaning heavily on personal charisma face major hurdles when it comes to succession, because the unique attributes that made one leader effective can't just be passed on. Leaders who build their power on personal charm, standout talent, or unique historical settings often leave systems that stumble when they exit. On the other hand, setups rooted in established routines and legal principles can keep things steady through leadership changes, provided everyone still buys into those systems. But if these procedures don't keep pace with changes or become too skewed by specific groups, their legitimacy can dwindle over time. The tricky part for those who establish political systems is to create bodies that remain relevant and accepted, even without the original creators at the helm. Various systems of picking leaders show different ways to tackle succession, each bringing its own set of pros and cons. Hereditary succession makes leadership changes predictable and can maintain institutional stability, but it doesn't ensure that successors have the skills needed for effective leadership. Such systems work all right for primarily symbolic roles or when strong safeguards limit the missteps of unqualified leaders, yet they fall short in times needing exceptional leadership or when leaders have significant freedom of action. Elective succession gives societies the chance to choose leaders based on proven abilities and current demands. However, it can also lead to factional disputes and leaders who aren't accepted by large segments of the public. Electoral systems function well when voters are informed enough to assess candidates properly and when the losing factions agree to the results. But they can falter when the race gets so heated that losers don't acknowledge the outcome, or when the voting processes become overly complicated, making results seem random or rigged. Mixed systems, which blend hereditary and electoral features, aim to harness the strengths of both, while softening their weaknesses, but they often muddy the waters about where legitimate authority truly lies. Government runs smoothly through different leaders, thanks to established institutions and practices that keep things steady beyond any one politician's career. A well-oiled bureaucracy still chugs along just fine, even if there's a big shake-up in the political scene. This consistency makes sure government services keep on keeping on and helps new bosses use the system's wisdom to push their agendas forward. However, sometimes these institutions prefer the status quo and might butt heads with elected officials looking to shake things up. Finding the sweet spot where stability and expertise meet responsiveness to change means picking the right people, training them well, and holding them accountable, all while keeping them in check democratically. Think of civil service systems, independent agencies and smart governance as ways of keeping certain parts of the government steady, yet still answerable to the people. Some nations handle leadership swaps like clockwork, while others fall apart, partly due to this balancing act. It gets even stickier when you throw international meddling into the mix, with outside forces trying to put their preferred people in charge, which can mess with the process and undermine the new leader's credibility. Such interference also risks sparking international tensions, as some neighbouring countries might take advantage of the chaos, or new leaders might play tough to prove themselves. So planning transitions means not only having solid structures at home, but also keeping foreign relations steady and being prepared to fend off outside pressure. This could mean ensuring others flip through the rule book during elections, managing economic impacts judiciously, or even having protection plans in place to ward off unwanted attention during the swap in power. On a different track, dealing with the personal side of leadership changes is about facing the human tendency to shy away from planning for the inevitable or stepping aside. Leaders get attached to their roles and might drag their feet about making way for the next in line, and their teams often don't push for plans that suggest their time in the sun is finite. Tackling this involves making succession no big deal, a regular gig that's expected and doesn't cause alarm. This might look like setting term limits, rotating key roles regularly, or having a bench of folks ready to step up. Plus, it helps to foster a culture that sees peaceful transitions as a badge of honour and a sign of progress, not as a sign of weakness. The aim here is to set up expectations and processes that make changing leadership seem smooth and advantageous instead of stressful and risky for everyone involved. Part 14. Conspiracy, Betrayal, and Managing Elite Rivalries. When you step into a position of political power, you're bound to make some enemies and face rivals. These folks might turn to plotting and violence when regular political methods don't get them what they want. Machiavelli's take on this subject is one of the sharpest analyses of how elite political rivalry plays out, diving deep into why people get caught up in conspiracies and how leaders can shield themselves from these internal threats. His thoughts are still spot on for today's issues, whether you're looking at military takeovers, corporate maneuvering, or terrorist plots. But he digs deeper than just tactics, exploring the ties between political trust and authority, as well as the psychology backing political power. If you're in a leadership role, you need to get a handle on these dynamics. You're operating in a mixed-up world where cooperation and competition, loyalty and ambition are all tangled together with the same people. What Machiavelli noted about conspiracies isn't just for governments. His observations apply to businesses, the military, universities, and social movements where the same kind of elite rivalries and potential betrayals pop up. At the core of his conspiracy analysis is the idea that political landscapes are always populated by ambitious types who think they could run things better than whoever's in charge. These people might turn to shady means if they feel the usual channels won't let them achieve their goals. They aren't villains, just people whose personal goals clash with the current power setup. This clash isn't due to something being broken in the system. It's just part of life in our complicated world. Leaders who do well are those who can steer these rivalries in useful directions while preventing them from blowing up into conspiracies and violence. To do that, leaders need a keen understanding of what drives people to conspire and what social conditions make these plots more likely. Ambitious people need roads to move up in their careers and help shape policy without having to rebel. Leaders getting wise to the psychology of potential plotters will notice some trends and act before things get out of hand. First, these schemers often feel like they've been wrongly passed over for recognition or promotions they feel they deserve. This feeling of unfairness brews resentment that can grow from specific gripes to a broader challenge against the leadership. Next, these would-be conspirators often convince themselves that pushing ahead would benefit the public, not just themselves. This mindset turns plotting into a supposedly noble act, rather than just a power grab, lowering their mental barriers against taking risky actions. Plus, they usually underestimate how tough pulling off a successful conspiracy would be, and overhype the level of support they'd get if they pulled it off. This mix of moral justification and overconfidence creates a certain psychological pattern that leaders can spot and counter with the right mix of compromise and firm deterrence. Rather than trying to squash ambition, the aim should be to steer it toward positive contributions. The way conspiracies take shape shows how personal desires can mesh with social conditions to set the stage for organized opposition against those in power. For a conspiracy to truly work, you need a bunch of people who are ready to gamble big, things like their lives and money, for rewards that might not even pan out. It's a lot easier to get folks on board when the current systems feel broken to the people in charge, or when they think the payoff of pulling it off is worth more than the risk of failing. Things like economic ups and downs, losing battles, or leaders caught in shady deals set the stage for conspiracies by lowering the risks of challenging the status quo and making victory more tempting. On the flip side, in places where folks trust each other, where there are good ways to sort out power struggles, and where power shifts smoothly, you won't see many big conspiracies happening. That's because people have legitimate ways to climb the ladder without causing trouble. If leaders can recognize what makes conspiracies more likely, they can tackle the roots of the issue rather than just putting out fires when they happen. As old advisor Machiavelli pointed out, guarding against conspiracies takes smart handling of institutions, gathering intel and getting a feel for people's mindset. Even today, his advice rings true in security planning. Leaders should make sure they've got different avenues for getting the scoop on what the elite are up to, so they can catch threats while they're still small. But they have to walk the fine line between making sure they're secure and not creeping people out with too much spying, which could backfire. Plus, keeping a solid defense team ready to act as a deterrent keeps conspirators at bay. But it's key to have these forces controlled in a way that they don't end up becoming a new threat themselves. Structuring political arenas to provide go-getters a chance to rise through the ranks peacefully, instead of pushing them to choose between staying stuck or stirring up trouble, is important. This might mean having leaders step down regularly, promoting based on ability, and letting potential challengers have a role in shaping decisions without risking a coup. The idea is to make working together more appealing than sneaky plotting. Dealing with the fallout from any conspiracy, whether it wins or loses, is tricky and needs finesse to avoid getting dragged into tit-for-tat, feuds that mess up political calm and question the structures in place. Leaders who come out of a conspiracy attempt might turn more cautious and controlling, which can backfire by alienating previously supportive followers, opening the door to new plots. On the other hand, coming down too hard on the plotters can backfire by making them martyrs and stirring up more opposition. Yet being too soft might look like a sign of weakness and invite more challenges. It's all about striking the right note, which calls for sharp political instincts and navigating tough calls about punishing individuals, which might set an example for future scenarios. Some modern strategies are all about making peace, like truth and reconciliation panels, offering repentance programs for rebellious types, and crafting power-sharing setups to steer former adversaries toward working together in politics. This push to understand these patterns helps clarify why some political scenes manage to maintain calm and thrive, while others get stuck in cycles of backstabbing, oppression, and retaliatory plots that drag down growth and development. The aim isn't to get rid of political competition. It can't be done, and we don't even want that. Instead, we need to make sure that competition follows rules that build up the political system rather than tear it down. Part 15. Machiavelli doesn't just see laws as timeless moral benchmarks or mere tools for those in charge. Instead, he explores how laws weave together with the political scene to build stability and trust, making governments run smoothly. His observations still spark debates in constitutional law and global discussions about legal systems in developing nations, teaching us that good governance demands more than just writing decent laws and hoping for the best. For those involved in reshaping legal frameworks, designing constitutions, or developing institutions, especially where formal law contends with other power structures and sources of legitimacy, Machiavelli's insights are vital. They also hold weight in modern talks about international laws, corporate rules, and regulatory policies, fields where balancing strict legal approaches with their practical impact is a tricky act. According to Machiavelli, the potency of legal institutions isn't rooted in their moral righteousness or logical purity, but in their alignment with power dynamics and social consensus. Laws that clash with fundamental powers get ignored, while those that fit the mold of power structures are often followed, even if they're morally questionable. For effective legal reform, it's crucial to focus on the political and social environments that make following laws attractive and advantageous, rather than just crafting better-sounding laws expecting them to change behaviours on their own. Laws tend to succeed when they align with behaviours people are already inclined to follow for various personal reasons, as opposed to trying to enforce completely new behaviours that go against current incentives. This explains why legal systems often stumble when transplanted into societies that aren't tuned into their original context, and why equal laws might not lead to real equality if deeper economic or social disparities exist. Machiavelli also sheds light on the dynamic between legal and non-legal sources of power. He points out that no matter how advanced a legal system is, it can't cover every scenario leaders might face, making it necessary for them to sometimes step beyond legal boundaries in dire situations. However, leaders who over-rely on such powers risk eroding the legitimacy and efficiency of legal systems that provide stability under normal conditions. The real skill lies in judging when stepping outside the legal lines is truly necessary, and ensuring these actions bolster, rather than weaken, the legal order over time. This balancing act remains a tough issue for democratic societies, especially when grappling with national security threats, economic crises, or health emergencies. So, let's break this down into more everyday speak. Imagine you have things like executive powers during wartime, or when a central bank needs to do its thing during a financial crisis. There are also all sorts of ways government agencies need to bend the rules a bit to fit specific situations. The aim here isn't to wipe out all extra legal authority, because that would just mess up governance. Instead, it's about making sure these actions actually benefit the public, and that they fit in with accountability and checks and balances. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what the legal system does. Sure, it's there to settle disputes and dish out penalties, but it goes way further than that. Legal structures help with social order, give legitimacy to actions, and manage the power dynamics in society. They offer predictable ways to sort through arguments that could otherwise lead to chaos. These institutions set the stage for how we understand our rights and duties, which makes it easier for people to engage in business and social interactions without always having to know each other personally. Most crucially, they offer pathways for political influence, redirecting frustration or ambition in more constructive paths instead of leaving folks with only rebellion or surrender as options. These roles of the law are arguably more critical for keeping things stable than the actual laws themselves. Legal bodies that excel at this gain trust and sway, even if their legal decisions aren't perfect or consistent. On the flip side, those that nail the technical side but miss these broader political aims might just get sidelined when political tensions are high. Now, when we talk about legal reforms, they often bring surprises because you can't just focus on the technical aspects without considering political and social contexts. The push and pull between strict legal definitions and real-world effectiveness create a constant juggling act in designing constitutions and reforming laws, a concept that Machiavellian thinking helps bring into focus. Sticking too closely to detailed legal standards can provide stability, but might block necessary changes. It can open the door for legal loopholes to be exploited for smaller interests instead of serving broader public needs. On the other hand, being too flexible with the law might yield practical advantages, but can also lead to unpredictability and potential abuse that can erode trust. Finding the sweet spot between firmness and flexibility depends on the particular situation and the existing institution's capabilities, and it's always a trade-off between values and objectives. Take, for instance, the debates around constitutional interpretation or the standards within administrative law, or consider international legal systems that need to work for different countries' legal cultures and systems. According to Machiavellian views, these tug-of-wars can't be settled just by sticking to legal thinking. They need political wisdom to figure out how legal systems can aid good governance and social harmony. Basically, the aim isn't to create flawless legal systems. It's just not viable. Instead, it's about crafting legal institutions robust enough to support political and social order, while still nimble enough to adapt to changes over time. Then there's enforcement. The real impact of laws relies heavily on political and social support systems. A law is just a suggestion without enforcement, and can be ignored if it clashes with personal interests or societal expectations. But to enforce a law, you need both the right institutions and political determination. This leads to a chicken and egg situation, where the effectiveness of laws depends on political conditions they're supposed to help shape. The issue of enforcing laws becomes especially tricky where the state is weak, societies clash with legal demands, or when a large chunk of the population doesn't trust the legal system. For the law to work well, these systems need to figure out enforcement methods that fit into current political and social landscapes, all while slowly building the institutions needed to ensure people follow the law more completely over time. This could mean strictly enforcing only the most crucial laws, using consequences that encourage people to follow the law voluntarily, or leaning on community-based efforts that leverage social pressures to back up legal goals. Today, we see this in things like community policing, where cooperation is preferred over punishment, and international laws that depend on reputation and mutual agreements instead of strong-armed enforcement. Grasping these enforcement methods sheds light on why simply tweaking laws often doesn't deliver the hoped-for changes, and why building strong institutions requires ongoing focus on how laws are actually put into action, rather than just writing new laws or tinkering with constitutions. Part 16. How opinion shapes politics and its impact. Public opinion and political leadership are like a puzzle, making it both tricky and intriguing to figure out. This dynamic dives into how democracy can thrive, considering the psychology of the masses and what makes government truly work. While some might praise the wisdom of the crowd or quickly dismiss it as chaotic, the Machiavellian take sheds light on when public feelings help or hurt leadership. This approach foresees how media, voter behaviour and propaganda play out in today's political landscape. It questions whether genuine, transparent governance can coexist with broad public backing, a dilemma that many democracies face even now. Grasping these connections is key for those involved in politics, whether leaders, activists, or everyday people, as they balance the need to be responsive with the need to be effective in our complex world. Machiavelli's ideas on public opinion are still timely, influencing discussions about social media, political divides, and the sneaky ways information can be twisted, tapping into the same psychological tricks he noted long ago. At the heart of this analysis is the idea that public judgment works differently than expert opinions or personal choices. Big groups tend to react more to what's immediate and emotionally charged, rather than diving into detailed arguments about what's to come or the nitty-gritty of policies. Therefore, political messaging has to cater to these instinctive reactions, acknowledging that people aren't diving into deep, thoughtful debates as much as democratic ideals might hope. Public opinion can be a bit of a roller coaster, quick to change with shocking news but losing steam with ongoing issues that demand long-term effort without quick fixes. It's more about looking back, judging leaders by outcomes rather than intentions, and simplifying complex societal changes into easy explanations, even if those don't match reality. These patterns aren't flaws to fix with better education. They're part of how groups digest political info, a reality clever leaders need to work with. The ethical riddle in leading comes from the pull between telling folks what they wish to hear and sharing what's essential for them to govern themselves wisely. While democratic theory suggests educated citizens can make solid choices on big issues, the Machiavellian view warns that too much honesty might weaken the very support leaders need to do their jobs well. People often lean towards comforting easy solutions over real, complex truths that harder, more honest policies demand. Leaders who stick to realistic portrayals might get pushed out by those promising quick fixes to big problems, never mind if they're actually feasible. This nudges communication to highlight perks, gloss over costs, blame failures on outside forces instead of inherent challenges, and overpromise results. Such tactics might lead to winning elections, but could also erode the informed consent, crucial for the legitimacy of democratic government. The gap between what the public thinks and what experts know points out another big hurdle in democracy that Machiavelli helps flesh out. Making good policies often needs deep expertise in areas too complex for regular citizens to master. In a democracy, it's essential for big policy choices to line up with what the majority of people want, not just what the experts think is best. This can lead to a clash because sometimes the public might push for actions experts believe won't work, or they might reject solutions that experts are sure are needed to tackle serious issues. So leaders have to find ways to win over public support for the policies advised by experts, without seeming to ignore or sway public opinion. This could involve educational campaigns to help people get a grip on technical matters, setting up ways for them to have a real say in decisions, or creating structures that keep some areas of policy out of direct public control while still holding them democratically accountable. Nowadays you see this in things like independent central banks, scientific advisory panels, and ways to blend expert insight with citizen involvement. The goal isn't to shut out public opinion or expert advice, but rather to create a setup where both voices play a part in shaping policies. Savvy leaders can sway public opinion to back needed policies while keeping things democratic and steering clear of any outright deceit. Good political communication is about presenting complex issues so that what needs to be done seems in line with what people value and care about, rather than asking folks to back things that go against their core beliefs. This might mean highlighting certain parts of a plan while downplaying others, linking policy arguments to common values and experiences, or announcing plans when the political climate is just right. Additionally, forming alliances to show widespread backing for certain policies, creating successful outcomes that build trust for bigger plans, or slowly rolling out controversial ideas so people have time to adapt, are all tactics that rely on a keen understanding of how people tick and sharp political skills. This allows democratic leaders to do their jobs well without misleading the public. What's important is that honest governance doesn't mean sharing every little detail, but making sure people agree based on understanding the main options and compromises, not on being fed false hopes or promises that can't be kept. The different systems for balancing leadership with public opinion include varied methods of representation, consultation, and keeping leaders accountable, which strive to blend being responsive with being effective. While direct democracy lets people decide policies on their own, it can sometimes lead to impulsive decisions instead of thoughtful ones about complex matters. Elected officials in representative democracies provide a buffer against the whims of public opinion while still being answerable to the public, but this can sometimes lead to a disconnect between what people want and what they're getting, which can hurt legitimacy. Different forms of deliberative democracy aim to merge citizen participation with structured discussions that improve decision-making quality, but might be too complicated or slow for everyday decisions. The best system setup depends on the situation and policy area, usually mixing several methods so the public can have influence in different ways while ensuring the democratic process results in workable policies. Examples today are citizen advisory boards, public comments for regulatory choices, and various participatory budgeting that allows citizens to directly impact specific government decisions. Grasping these institutional choices sheds light on why some democratic nations handle the leader-public dynamic better than others do. It also highlights why democratic governance needs continual institutional tweaking instead of just sticking to set democratic rules. The aim isn't to perfectly sync public opinion with policy results, as that's likely unachievable in intricate societies. Instead, it's about ensuring democratic systems allow enough public sway to keep legitimacy intact, while crafting policies that effectively tackle major social issues. Part 17. The geography of power, focusing on the role of territory, borders and strategic space. This often overlooked aspect of Machiavellian thought ties domestic governance to international relations, military strategies and economic growth, making it highly relevant for today's political scene. Unlike those who see territory as merely a backdrop for political events, Machiavelli's take looks at how geography can shape political opportunities, create strategic strengths and weaknesses, and impact the success of various governmental approaches. His ideas on controlling territory, managing borders, and connecting geography with political institutions were way ahead of his time, predicting modern theories on geopolitics, regional development, and the economics of space. These theories still play a significant role in military planning, international dealings, and internal policies. Machiavelli also highlighted how geographical factors pair with human institutions and technology, creating strategic environments that are always changing and need adaptable political responses. Understanding these geographical aspects is vital for anyone working in national security, regional development, or international relations, where space presents both opportunities and challenges that influence political results. The relevance of Machiavellian geographical insights carries over into today's debates on globalization, climate change, and tech disruptions, which are all reshaping the ties between territory and political power and demand fresh strategic approaches. Machiavelli's geographical analysis begins with the idea that controlling territory is the bedrock of political authority. However, effective control means more than just occupying land. Territories need protection from outsiders, must be governed through institutions, and require integration both economically and culturally to foster true political communities, not just occupied areas. Each of these needs differs based on geographical aspects like size, shape, terrain, climate, resources, and proximity to other political powers. Smaller territories might be easier to govern and protect, but may lack the resources for true independence. On the other hand, larger regions may have plenty of resources, but pose greater challenges in terms of integration and defense. Natural features like mountains, rivers, and coastlines create borders that can help in defense and administration, but they might also cause internal splits that make unity tricky. Additionally, geographical location in relation to trade routes, resources, and neighbouring political entities affects strategic opportunities and vulnerabilities, impacting foreign policy choices and domestic growth. A key takeaway from Machiavellian strategic analysis is the link between expanding territory and maintaining political stability. Expanding territory can unlock more resources, fend off external threats, and showcase government strength, boosting domestic and international standing. Yet with expansion comes increased administrative duties, defense commitments, and potential conflicts that might outweigh the benefits of new territory. A political entity's ideal territorial size depends on its institutions, capabilities, the technology it has, and its strategic environment, rather than generic ideas about expansion or remaining isolated. History shows us that both overexpansion and excessive isolation can be dangerous. While the most successful entities expand slowly, letting their institutions adjust to new challenges. In modern times, this includes the struggles of federal systems, needing to balance local and national interests, the complexities of nation-building in occupied areas, and the push-pull between economic unity and political independence within international groups. Looking at how countries manage their borders shows us how geographic lines interact with politics to bring about both security issues and opportunities. These elements are something that leaders need to continually focus on. A good border should be strong enough to defend against military threats, easy to manage for administrative tasks, and open enough to allow economic and cultural exchanges that are beneficial but also restrictive enough to prevent harmful infiltration. It's tricky because these roles often don't align perfectly and require clever organizational frameworks that can shift as situations and threats evolve. Natural landscapes might offer some defensive strengths, but they rarely line up with the best spots for business or government purposes. Plus, tech advancements keep changing the game, affecting how certain geographic features are valued and presenting new ways to either defend or attack, leading to adjustments in how borders are managed. Take aviation, for instance, which has changed how we think about traditional geographic barriers, or how cyber warfare goes beyond physical borders, not to mention climate change, which presents new challenges to how borders are currently set up. When we look at how power is spread out economically, it shows us how space interacts with trade, resources and technology to either limit or enhance what countries can do both within their borders and beyond. Those in control of key geographic spots like ports, mountain passes or rivers can turn these into economic gains, but others stuck in less strategic areas might face tough challenges. However, these natural perks can be either boosted or diminished by what an institution can do, what tech it has up its sleeve, and strategic partnerships that let countries go beyond their immediate geographic limitations. New tech in transport and communications constantly updates how valuable different land features are and creates opportunities for economic and political blending beyond traditional borders. Think about containerization affecting port cities, digital tech enabling distant work, or the strategic value rare earth minerals hold for tech advancements. Grasping these shifting dynamics can clarify why some regions thrive economically and politically, while others, despite natural advantages, don't see the same level of success. Moreover, the cultural and psychological sides of territorial identity show how spaces get wrapped up in political significance, affecting people's loyalty, national pride, and a country's standing in the world in ways that go beyond mere strategic considerations. Places seen as historic homelands, sacred grounds, or vital to national identity usually get stronger emotional backing and political support compared to areas viewed just as practical assets or resources. These deep connections can stir up political movements and resistances, but can also pose challenges to logical strategic planning and peaceful resolutions. Areas with diverse populations, contested histories, or weak cultural ties might need different governance approaches compared to regions with more unified populations and shared identities. The task for leaders is to foster enough local loyalty to ensure political unity, while steering clear of the kind of territorial nationalism that could spark unnecessary strife with neighbouring entities. Current situations such as territorial disputes sparking international conflicts, multicultural societies grappling with diverse claims, and how migration or global shifts impact traditional territorial identities showcase these challenges. Understanding the cultural layers can help explain why territorial conflicts often resist resolution, and why managing territories effectively demands a focus on symbolic and psychological aspects, not just the usual administrative or military facets. We're not trying to get rid of the ties people have to their land, because these connections are vital for building political identity and bringing societies together. Instead, the aim is to handle these attachments wisely so that they help reinforce political communities and steer clear of harmful disputes over borders. Part 18. Corruption and the Decay of Political Virtue. Machiavelli delved deep into the idea of political corruption, offering a nuanced perspective on how political systems deteriorate and start to falter in their governing abilities. Unlike views that label corruption merely as either a personal moral lapse or criminal act, he explored how the very structure of a system could make corrupt actions seem reasonable and rewarding to those in politics. His thoughts on how the setup of institutions and the surrounding social landscape foster corruption still shape modern studies on government effectiveness, economic growth, and the strengthening of democracy worldwide. Machiavelli showed that simply enacting new laws or teaching morals won't easily weed out corruption, because it often points to more significant issues within the institution that need more profound changes. Getting to grips with these issues is critical for anyone striving to reform institutions, boost economic progress, or combat corruption, especially where current systems have been hijacked by certain interests or honest governance is tough to maintain. His ideas remain pertinent as today's world, both in rich and poor countries, continues grappling with political corruption that weakens governments and shakes the faith people have in democracies. The essence of Machiavelli's take on corruption is in how he differentiates between two types: individual corruption, which involves specific dishonest acts or misuse of power, and systemic corruption, which denotes a fall in standards and norms that usually keep selfish actions in check. Individual corruption can happen anywhere, and might be tackled by tightening monitoring, ensuring enforcement, and punishing wrongdoers. However, systemic corruption signifies a more profound issue where corrupt acts stop being outliers and become the standard, eroding the shared understanding of acceptable conduct. This scenario makes honest behaviour risky because sticking to the rules puts one at a disadvantage compared to those who flout them. As economists would say, this creates a corruption equilibrium where everyone feels pressured to engage in corruption, regardless of their moral beliefs. Shifting away from such a state demands a coordinated transformation in institutional frameworks, enforcement strategies, and societal expectations, far beyond just catching individual wrongdoers. The interplay between economic inequality and political corruption sheds light on how social conditions mix with institutional setups to either foster or hinder integrity in governance. When there's drastic economic inequality, it prompts the wealthy to buy political influence corruptly. Moreover, public servants earning meagre wages might turn to corrupt acts to make ends meet. Furthermore, this economic gulf could diminish the political clout of middle-class groups, who are often the strongest advocates for clean government and institutional change. If economic elites find success using corruption rather than democratic means, they lack motive to back reforms making the government more attentive to the public's broader concerns. Similarly, if government officials find it tough to survive on their legal earnings, corrupt acts might seem like a necessary means rather than ethical failings. Therefore, tackling deep-rooted corruption involves looking at the economic context, tweaking institutional structures, and beefing up enforcement measures. Modern cases, such as how wealth from natural resources affects governance, or globalization's impact on regulatory control, show how economic growth underpins democratic strengthening. Understanding these factors clarifies why focusing solely on legal enforcement in anti-corruption drives often falls short. Instead of just focusing on the generalized social and economic situations that make corruption seem logical and tempting, we should look at how different institutional setups either enable or restrict corrupt activities. Depending on how governments are organized, you get varying levels of motivation for officers to act either ethically or corruptly. Systems that put too much power in the hands of a few without any real checks and balances tend to breed corruption, while those that spread power around to many with opposing interests naturally set up barriers against corrupt actions. However, if power is too broken up, it gets confusing to figure out who is responsible, giving corrupt individuals loopholes to slip through. The best way to structure institutions really hinges on wider social influences, technology, and cultural beliefs, because these factors influence how well these setups work in practice. Having transparency tools that allow the public to see what the government is doing can limit corruption. By making shady dealings glaringly obvious and politically damaging. But just being open isn't enough if civil society can't effectively keep tabs on the government, or the media itself is corrupt. Likewise, having competitive elections could push for cleaner governance, since voters can vote out corrupt leaders. Nevertheless, campaigns might push policy boundaries to secure finances when they can't cover costs legitimately, fueling political corruption in its own right. On an international level, corruption poses extra hurdles that can't be tackled with just national reforms. Globalization has made it easier for corrupt individuals to stash money overseas, use international banking to clean dirty money, and skirt around legal consequences by exploiting different legal systems. Economic competition between countries might lead them to loosen up regulations to attract foreign investments, or give a leg up to local businesses internationally. Multinational companies could play dirty in countries with weak rule of law, while maintaining a squeaky clean image at home, creating a hypocrisy that hinders global anti-corruption work. To tackle these global issues, countries and international bodies with sometimes opposing interests and methods must come together for joint actions. An example of this collaboration is seen in dealing with money laundering, tax dodging, and bribery in global business, which all need intricate international teamwork and enforcement tactics. Then there are the cultural and psychological sides to corruption, showing how societal values and personal viewpoints mix with institutional frameworks to foster or inhibit honest governance. Societies that have deep roots in civic participation, trust and law respect generally deal with less corruption, compared to those that lack these virtues. Cultural norms aren't set in stone, though. They can shift in response to institutional setups and societal changes, meaning corruption can grow as it eats away at social trust and community participation. Individual views on corruption often link more to how they perceive fairness, efficiency and legitimacy in governments rather than just sticking to moral high grounds. If folks feel that the government only serves the elite, they might see corruption as normal or even justified. But if they trust that institutions work for the public good more broadly, they are likely to back initiatives to fight corruption. This implies that strategies to combat corruption must deal with issues of political credibility and institutional performance, along with targeting specific corrupt practices if we aim to better governance in a lasting way. The aim isn't just to wipe out all corruption, which might be a tall order in intricate societies. Instead, it's about shaping systems where people find it beneficial to act honestly, and the price of corrupt acts is high enough to deter people from consistently misusing their positions. This means we need to constantly focus on keeping our institutions in good order and refreshing them regularly, rather than just putting anti-corruption laws in place and expecting them to magically work on their own. Part 19. The dance between knowledge and power. Machiavelli dived into one of the toughest puzzles in politics, how intellectual clout pairs up with political might. Where some traditions either treat politics as if it's at the mercy of highbrow truths or just shrug off deep thinking in the halls of governance, Machiavelli took a different road. He looked at how the brains and the brawn of politics work together, sometimes opening doors for savvy leadership, but also presenting threats. Machiavelli's ideas about the usefulness of know-how in politics, how book smarts have their limits, and how being intellectually unchained can boost political clout, still shape conversations today. You'll see his fingerprints all over discussions about technocrats running the show, boffins advising on policy, and universities' spots in the democratic landscape. But he also pointed out why brainy routes to political headaches often hit dead ends. Leading with success in politics calls for skills that aren't the same ones you'd use to dazzle in academic circles. Grasping this balance is key if you're crafting policies, involved in research, or using your expertise to sway political choices in our tangled modern world. Machiavelli's take on how knowledge plays with power is still hitting the mark, especially in talks about basing policies on hard facts, weaving AI into government, or navigating the tricky waters of information wars. All those themes echo the tension between brainy authority and the people's voice, just like Machiavelli noted ages ago. At the root of his thoughts was a split between two knowledge types: knowledge for knowledge's sake, which loves truth, and knowledge that aims for getting things done in the here and now. Theoretical stuff is about grasping unchanging truths, while practical stuff is all about making smart calls in the moment, based on what's happening around you and the cards you're dealt. Both have a say in political playbooks, but march to different beats and might butt heads on what course of action to take. When theory chimes in, it's about logical harmony, sticking to the facts and looking sharp on paper, even if it doesn't gel with what policies should carry out. Practical thinking, on the other hand, focuses on what works, can actually happen, and can bend when needed, even if it means letting some theoretical ideals slip. To lead politically, you've got to tap into both wells of knowledge, knowing where each excels and where it might trip up. The power of expertise in politics shows how deep knowledge can smooth the ship of state, but also how it can brew new storms of political headaches. Expert insight into tricky areas like economics, public health, or military matters can replace guesswork with fact and reveal options laypeople might overlook. Yet this know-how can lead to dependency on experts who are human too. They might have their own agendas that clash with the greater good. Plus, it may cause trouble for democracy if expert advice goes against the grain of what people want. The task for political leaders is to use expert power wisely, while staying true to democratic principles and not becoming puppets to narrow technical views that might ignore what really matters, politically and socially. Getting this right means setting up systems that welcome expert input without relinquishing the final call, which must factor in bigger pictures than what raw expertise can see. Nowadays, we see this balance tried out in scientific advisory panels, independent bodies that regulate, and various pushes for policies grounded in evidence. They all attempt to marry expert smarts with the voice of the people. Alright, so here's the gist of it. When it comes to politics, theories don't always line up with the real world. See, theories are crafted and tested in controlled settings, but the political arena is a whole different beast. It's messy, forever changing and full of tricky dilemmas and conflicts. Theoretical models trim down reality to make things more manageable, but politics is all about dealing with those complexities that theories often ignore. These theories aim for perfect solutions under perfect conditions, but real-world politics demands solutions that work with the limitations and resources on hand. This mismatch can lead to a gap where theoretical advice falls flat when applied to actual policy challenges. For political leaders to really make a difference, they need to convert theoretical ideas into workable plans and adapt those plans to situations that theories just can't predict or control. This requires skills beyond theoretical number crunching, like good political judgment, the knack for negotiating and understanding the hurdles in getting ideas off the ground, which formal academic training doesn't always cover. There's this ongoing tug-of-war for academics and policy experts between maintaining their independent thinking and being effective in the political sphere. Intellectual work should be about following the evidence and logic, not catering to political pressures or popularity. But to make a real impact in politics, experts have to tailor their insights to fit political realities, create alliances among different groups, and settle for compromise solutions, even if they aren't the intellectual ideal. Stick stubbornly to pure independence, and your work might end up as that great but unused wisdom on a shelf. Bend too much to politics, and you risk losing credibility. Striking the right balance between standing your ground intellectually and engaging effectively in politics demands understanding both sides deeply. Think tanks, universities working with the government, and public intellectuals trying to mesh academia with the political realm are all in this balancing act. Then there's the political game of using knowledge as a tool, a kind of weapon in debates. Politicians might sponsor research or rely on expert opinions, not to genuinely get to the truth, but to gain an edge in arguments. This can warp both the research itself and the political conversation, as the endgame becomes serving political ends rather than true understanding. Opponents will often try to discredit research or push their own experts, muddying the waters regardless of who actually has the best insights. All this can erode trust in experts and make it harder to use research to genuinely improve policies. The challenge is to build structures that keep research honest and allow its insights to positively impact politics. This might mean setting up independent research centres, having open review systems, and improving how science is communicated so that everyone can better assess the different claims out there. The aim isn't to cut off knowledge from politics, that would make it irrelevant, but to make sure politics helps, rather than hinders, the process of creating knowledge. Part 20. Machiavelli's impact still resonates through the ages, transcending the specific time and place he lived in. His political analysis offers a lens to understand the ebb and flow of political landscapes, constantly evolving to meet the demands of today's world. What's truly impressive about his work isn't a particular policy he suggested or an institutional system he crafted, but his way of dissecting politics, observing real-world situations rather than relying on lofty theories and valuing what works over what's morally pristine. His way of thinking has seeped into numerous fields, from the theories of global politics to the study of workplace behaviour and even strategic business planning, equipping us with intellectual tools that have stood the test of time across diverse eras and cultures. Yet Machiavelli's name also stirs up debates about balancing political effectiveness with moral integrity, a topic that many democracies wrestle with even today. For anyone tapping into Machiavellian insights to tackle modern political issues, understanding his legacy is vital, all while steering clear of blatant manipulation or soulless pragmatism that some have, perhaps unfairly, tied to his philosophy. The challenge for future political thinkers is to appreciate Machiavelli's enduring relevance and grapple with the limitations of his ideas in new contexts he couldn't have foreseen, but are nonetheless similar to the environments he examined. As we wrap up, let's ensure this final analysis piece ties everything together. Machiavelli's approach and core ideas, how these play out today, the disputes and criticisms that linger, future pathways for adaptation, and a final judgment on the lasting impact of his work. The shake-up Machiavelli introduced continues to influence how people scrutinize politics by emphasizing the need to base analysis on what's observed in reality over fancy theories or idealistic dreams. By focusing on the reality of politics instead of an idealized version, he laid the groundwork for today's methodical approach to social sciences. This data-driven stance often questions easy assumptions about how people tick, how institutions work, and what political reform can achieve. But it also provides steadier guidance for action, since it looks at things as they are, rather than how we might wish them to be. Machiavelli's legacy includes not just specific analytical tools, but also a way of thinking, questioning official stories, being aware of unforeseen effects, and realizing that having good intentions doesn't ensure good results. These attitudes are crucial in any era, though their application has to sway with advancements in technology, shifts in society, and changes in institutions. Today, the continued significance of Machiavellian analysis is clear when we consider issues haunting democratic systems, international bodies, and reform efforts globally. His thoughts on the friction between expert advice and public opinion shed light on modern arguments about technocratic rule, relying on science in policy making, and how expertise fits into democratic processes. Also, his take on the link between economic disparity and political calm gives us a lens to view present worries over democracy's stability, rising populist waves, and the political ripples of globalization. His dive into how conspiracies work and how elites compete offers a fresh perspective on today's issues, from the way politics have gotten so divided, to how businesses are run and even how countries handle their partnerships. When he talks about luck and random events, it helps us think differently about dealing with risks, planning for the future, and building strong organizations, especially when technology is zooming forward and the world feels unpredictable. But above all, his emphasis on what it takes to actually govern well still matters to anyone in charge of an organization. Rolling out policies or designing systems that need to turn good intentions into tangible outcomes. The tricky parts of Machiavelli's political thinking show deeper questions about how power and justice fit together, issues that don't get sorted out just by theorizing but need real-world judgment, tailored to each unique situation. Machiavelli's move to separate political savvy from old-school moral values has opened up the floor for a real-world look at how power plays out. However, it also raises concerns about if purely practical politics can truly support human well-being and teamwork. His stress on flexibility and sound judgment might make it easier to adapt, but it could also mess with the consistency and foresight that laws and teamwork thrive on. While focusing on elite leadership and building institutions, he might overlook key democratic principles like citizen participation and political equality, which are crucial for today's idea of legitimate governance. You can't just solve these tensions with theory, because they mirror real opposing values that don't always align perfectly. The strength of Machiavellian analysis isn't in providing definitive answers to moral and political dilemmas, but in highlighting necessary compromises and equipping us with tools to make tough calls when values collide. As political realism evolves, it needs to tackle fresh challenges brought on by tech innovations, global connections, and environmental shifts that redefine everything from national boundaries to who holds the reins of power. The digital era is transforming political communication and control in ways old theories didn't foresee, and global economies link political systems in new, limiting, yet cooperative ways. Climate change calls for long-range planning and global collaboration that might stretch beyond the reach of current structures, stirring up fresh areas of discord and unrest. With AI and automation rewriting the basics of human roles, economic structures and teamwork living in political theory's backbone, we must broaden Machiavellian methods to explore unexplored areas, blending age-old insights on power, leadership, and institutions with the new world we find ourselves in. The lasting value of Machiavellian political thought isn't pinned down to specific advice for rulers or republics, but in offering a framework to think clear-headedly about political issues without getting lost in moral perfectionism or theoretical beauty over practical truths. This mindset holds its worth since today's political trials run parallel to the age-old struggles between personal and community goals, ethical ideals and real-world demands, and balancing immediate and future needs exactly as Machiavelli saw them back in his time. Human nature really hasn't evolved that much since the 1500s, so the insights from that era about what drives people, how they lead, and how groups behave are still super relevant for breaking down today's politics. What makes up political life? Things like needing strong institutions, handling both conflict and working together, and juggling domestic and global issues are challenges that have stuck around through time and across cultures. Instead of just slapping Machiavelli's conclusions onto today's issues, it's smarter to use his way of thinking to come up with fresh insights tailored to the current scene while dodging traps like wishful thinking and moral complacency, which he saw as major roadblocks to getting real political results. This means we've got to mix a clear-eyed view of how things stand with some out-of-the-box ideas about new institutions and strategies that can tackle modern challenges, all while borrowing from the political know-how gained over the years. A guy who started off as just a small-time civil servant in Florence went on to spark a revolution in ideas that's still shaping how we think about power and leadership 500 years on. By not buying into the comforting but false ideas about politics, he made room for smarter ways to handle the age-old issues of group cooperation and running society. Still, these insights bring both chances to do good and risks of doing harm, depending a lot on the values and goals of those applying them. The real test of Machiavelli's political savvy isn't how nice it looks in theory, or how morally clean it is, but rather how well it helps shape institutions and practices that push humanity forward, while also admitting how tough and breakable those wins can be, in a world where people often mean well, but rarely manage to act effectively. His way of digging into how politics actually works, instead of how we wish it would be, remains incredibly useful for anyone hoping to make a positive impact. His influence sticks around wherever folks reject holding up moral pretenses over real political action, wherever they trust hard evidence more than abstract theory, and wherever they take on the tough job of leading while expanding what people can do together in fairness and justice.